All right, we are live. Don Moxley, welcome back to the future of fitness, my friend.
I am excited to be back. What is this, four times, three times?
Maybe I think it's four. I think it's
I think
four.
it's
Yeah, I
four.
think we've. Yeah. You've been a staple of this podcast, and I'm very grateful to have you on it. Over the last 7 years, it's been over 7 years now. I've been doing this thing, and
Yeah.
every time I have you on, I learn a lot. I know it gets great feedback from our listeners. So people today with the topic we're going to cover with Don and there's a lot of stuff on Don. There's a lot of stuff on you, Don. People want to go out there and look at your background and very well respected in the world of sports science, sports performance, longevity, you name it. You've been at the cutting edge, and you've been also being at the beginning of a lot of
hmm
these technologies. So it's very good to see. I urge you, people, dear listener, grab a notebook. We're going to learn a lot today. So what we're going to focus on today, Don, as you and I discussed, and this is quite big, 2035, right?
Right.
Like this in the future someday. Uh, what is human performance going to look like? What are the technologies? What are the trends? What are um, the advancements that we're going to have over the next 10 years in human performance? And I think let's start with this. Like when you say human performance in your mind, let's define it. What does that mean exactly? Because I know it's kind of important to the conversation.
Yeah. So, you know what, Eric? I think our first podcast, we were talking about cannabis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yes.
And I was living down in Florida at the time, working for a cannabis brand down there. And I was struggling at the time because I had just left Ohio State. I was the first paid sports scientist at the Ohio State University, and I'm an Ohio State University grad. My mom and dad had three boys. Those three boys have six kids. Of the nine of us, five of us have been varsity athletes at Ohio State. We have the second most varsity letters of any family in the history of the university. So we have a real connection back to OSU. Um, and so I was there working with the wrestling program. We were doing some really cool work, and you can find a lot of that work out on the interwebs. But I wound up having to leave. I and and so that was a bit of a struggle. So I took this opportunity that I'd been looking at in cannabis, and I was living down in Florida. And I'm thinking, how do you go from this really cool job when you're working with national champions and Olympians and these really cool athletes to selling weed in South Florida? How does that happen? Um, and I sat back and I thought about it, and I'd heard another podcast somewhere along the way, and the guy said, don't define yourself by your education, define yourself by your personal mission. And I thought,
Hmm.
wow, that's interesting. So I took a step back, and this was really good. My wife and daughter were still living back in Ohio. I was down in Florida on my own. And so I had time to think and work and write. And I came up with my personal mission. And I defined my personal mission as helping individuals understand the changes necessary to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. That's my personal mission. Um, and
It's pretty
so
good.
I appreciate that. But it was transformative for me, Eric. It really changed my world, my role, my view. I no longer wanted to go back to university. With all the good, there's bad. And the question is, can you tolerate the bad in order to live off the good? I've made up my mind. I can't tolerate that bureaucratic environment. I'm too entrepreneurial. It doesn't fit me. Um, but I still consult with universities and athletic programs and sport programs and athletes. I still do that. And I go back to this base of helping individuals understand the changes necessary to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. Now, how do you do that? Well, mine is in technologies. And technologies can be heart rate monitors or wearable technologies. It can be supplements. It can be small molecule supplements that we can tie the science to. It can be practices. It can be breathing practices. It can be all these different technologies that an individual can adopt that will adapt their systems to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people, help win. Um, so that's where I come from. I'm a former university professor for 25 years. I'm a sports scientist. I'm a technology nut. I'm when I lived in a house, I had a credenza that had probably 50 different wearable devices in it. I don't live in a house anymore. I live in a 42-foot fifth wheel, so I can't have 50 devices. My wife won't let me do that anymore. But I'm constantly exploring. And it's this journey I've been on for the last few years, and just most recently, Eric, I stepped back into the sporting world, as I was out of it for about a decade, working in longevity and general wellness. But I went to the NSCA conference in Baltimore in July, and it's the first time I've been at that conference in probably 15, 20 years. And I was at early NSCA. I presented papers. I've been an active part of that organization for a long time. But I walked in and I'm at the trade show and I'm looking at the journal and I'm saying, Jesus, they're doing the same shit. They're looking at the same stuff we were looking at 20 and 30 years ago. That literally there's been no improvement. It's, the weight rooms have gotten bigger and the racks have gotten taller, but generally the practice and the articles in the journal are answering the same questions. Now they're fine minute detail on the kinematics of a field hockey player in a sprint. It's some PhD student is trying to find that one thing that they become the expert on, and that's where the paper comes from. There's no new information there for the most part, though. And so it made me crazy. So I took a step back and I said, okay, so instead of just being a critic, how can I be part of the solution? And so that's when I started looking at, I said, okay, number one, I'm going to do my own podcast. You and I talked about this a little bit ago. I went and grabbed the URL over the horizon.life, and I call my podcast Life Over the Horizon, because I want to help young professionals develop a vision for what things will be in a decade. Because right now, one of my students gets out and they go look at what is. They go see the existing weight rooms. They go see the existing training facilities. And really, one of the only levers you have to pull is size. I can go bigger. And so it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. No one's changing content. Okay. And we live in a time, I was just talking to a friend of mine a little bit ago. The biggest technological change in health and fitness in the last 5 years, last decade, last millennia, GLP-1s. Okay. Utilization of GLP-1s for people to achieve their goals. And I was drinking my coffee this morning. I was watching TV, and I saw an advertisement for a aesthetics practice, and they use some type of a radio frequency that melts the fat. You lose 25% of your fat per visit. But they've combined it with this sonic, they call it sonic. I think it's probably a PEMF technology. He said you do 30,000 crunches in 15 minutes. And, I'm sure they're strapping a PMF onto someone and lighting them up. And I'm like, is this the future? Is that aesthetics practice going to evolve into the health club in a decade? I don't think so. I think there's still room for this, but I think we have to help professionals develop a vision, because that will alleviate the fear of change. If they have a vision for what can be done, they won't fear stepping out of the dogma. And I think this is important. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's why you and I are talking today. It's kind of a fun place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate that mission. I started this podcast, whatever it was, well over 7 years ago now. And I call it the future of fitness. And I've used this term a lot because the Gretzky quote, I want to help the industry skate to where the puck is going. And I say the industry, but really when I started, it was selfishly for me, because I didn't know what I was going to do next, right? Sold my gyms. I'm like, kind of lost, not really sure. Someone suggested I should start a podcast. I'm like, I like podcasts. So sure, I'll do it. And then I just started interviewing some friends, interviewing some people I knew and respected. And then I just didn't stop, and I just kept asking the question, like, well, what's coming around the corner? What could we be taking advantage of? Where are we missing out? Like, are we in this industry? And I say industry, fitness traditionally, like you mentioned, really has been not good at looking what's coming next. In fact, sometimes we're even looking backwards and not
It's horrible.
advancing at all. So
Yeah.
I love that you're looking to do that. I think there's a lot of people out there who very much want to know, well, what should I be looking at now so that 5 years from now I'm at the cutting edge, right? And I think that's, obviously it's not easy. If you had a crystal
No.
ball, we'd be billionaires, right? But we're
Right.
not. At least I'm not. I don't know where you sit. So
I'm
yeah,
nowhere
so
close.
paint us a picture, man. I mean, what are you starting to look at as like some of the bigger advancements? And since you and I started talking, even over the last 6 years, things have changed dramatically. And since you've been, the first probably heart rate monitor you ever put on, things have come light years ahead.
Yes,
So we've
absolutely.
seen a lot of change. But what's the stuff on your radar? What should we know, Don?
Eric, I don't know. Okay, so let me start there. Um,
Yeah,
I am on a
that's fair.
quest like everybody else. I'm trying to identify what are the trends, and again, what let's start with what's not working. Okay, and the fact is that COVID was a real litmus test for the fitness industry, and it was transformative. Okay, we saw Peloton explode, and now we've seen them come back down to earth. But it doesn't change the fact that largely fitness is dominated by enthusiasts, and enthusiasts tend to move from place to place. When you had a gym, your biggest challenge was keeping your member from going to the new gym that opened down the street. That was the biggest thing. So the
Yeah,
question is, how do you do that? And that's a legit challenge, whether you're a personal trainer or a small gym owner or something like that. The new kid on the block is always, bright and shiny, and having a relationship. But, I was having this discussion with a friend of mine earlier, and I said, the work I was doing at Ohio State, with the wrestling program, with this elite group, um, was the physiology different? No, physiology is the same. What was different is we mindfully, intentionally created data sets, and and the data exists. Okay. Every time someone walks in and puts a pin in a machine or puts a plate on a bar and moves it a certain number of repetitions, they create a data set, and that data set is valuable. It may not be valuable in and of itself, but as you aggregate this, it then starts to build value. So with that said, one of the things that I think will be dramatic in the next decade is your ability to leverage your data. Not just an individual, but also a professional. Now, I think individual data management, things like Aura rings and Now Watch bracelets and the other technologies that we have are creating incredible data sets that, when used correctly, can be incredibly informative. When used incorrectly, creates an amazing amount of frustration. So the facility, the advisor, it may not be brick and mortar. It may be a Zoom call. But my point is that there is and it's probably a very high volume of data. If I'm able to create 3.5 million data points from a college wrestling program in one season, imagine what we can do. And that was, that was not full gas on data acquisition. That was just kind of a passive approach, a little bit active. If you have this facility, or if you have a tribe that you're advising, you have access to an amazing asset, and that is in the data. Number one. Number two, listen, you can't swing a dead cat right now and not hit something that says AI. Everyone is freaked out about it. Everyone's losing their mind about it. I like to think of AI in two terms. I don't particularly care for that term. I like machine learning. I think that when I can turn a computer system loose on a data set So it can grind the value out of the data set rather than me sitting there with spreadsheets and so forth. That's really good. So machine learning is really good. Large language models are the other side of this. How do we communicate? How do I make myself a better communicator? And the use of large language models like on like a chat GPT or something like that, I can load up the information, I can ask the question, I can pull the handle, I get the response. If I don't like it, I pull the handle again. And I get to the response that I think is going to help my member, consultant, my client make a change that alleviates suffering and contributes to the betterment. That is, I think those are two things that if you're not really starting to pay attention to right now, you're probably going to be losing ground. You're going to be 20 years old. You're going to be doing the same thing you did 20 years ago, not what you're doing 10 years from now. So number one, data. Number two, in that data management, I think the role of economics is really important. And it's the economics of, if I put a piece of technology on a barbell and I divide my team into two groups. One uses the technology and one that doesn't. And the technology's coaching group A to stop at 3 reps. There's some filter on it that says you've met your point, you're done. Whereas group B normally goes along and does 7, 10, whatever reps. Okay. I believe what we're going to see in a decade is the group that did 3 reps is going to have as much benefit as the group that did 10. So their investment of 3 developed the same yield as the investment of 7 or 10. This is an economics argument. Where do I spend my time? If I spend 20 minutes in zone 2 versus 50 minutes in zone 4, these are economic arguments that we're making, and the economics are informing the physiology. This is what's so important. And again, right now you see a red light panel over my left-hand shoulder here. What is the role of these new adjunct technologies? How does light impact? Can I spend 20 minutes in front of this thing, or over my right shoulder, if I turn the camera, is a sauna? What is the value of being in my sauna 20 minutes a day versus being on my Peloton 20 minutes a day? You know what? There's some interesting questions that get raised there, but we don't get a great answer to that until we aggregate the data, we run the analysis on it, we do the economic analysis, then we use that to inform our physiological counseling, our physiological coaching, our ability to help that athlete train and stay healthy, to help that athlete's parent get to work and not have an overuse injury, and that athlete's grandparent to prevent a fall that will begin the end of their life. In the human machine, I think these things come together. I believe there'll be a change in what the facilities look like. I absolutely believe that. But the big changes that we start to see are listen, what is the question? What is the impact of a GLP-1 on my member's goal? Does my member achieve their goal more effectively with the use of a GLP-1 versus the use of a Star Trek treadmill? This is these are the kind of things that we're starting to look at, that the facility in a decade, in 35, Eric, I think you've got to be able to use data to make decisions. I define sports science as creating data sets that give athletes and coaches the ability to make better decisions. Well, this is the same thing, again, whether it's for the athlete's parent, or the athlete's grandparent. They all go hand in hand.
So what I'm hearing, Don, is that we're probably at this point asking the wrong questions, right? Everyone's asking, well, what should I use red light therapies? Should I do cold plunge? Should I do how much zone 2 cardio? Should I be doing VO2 max training? Like all these things. But what we should be asking is like, well, given the amount of time and energy you have in a given day or week, what's the best things that I should be doing for my specific goals. And the way to get there is to understanding the data, right? Understanding the individual, and then applying that, the best, I guess, protocols for each individual person, which is kind of like when people, I think, are saying nowadays is the buzzword this year is hyper personalization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Am I getting that right? Am I getting the gist of that?
No, I think you're spot on, oh goodness, and I think you're spot on, and the challenge winds up being how the question is being answered. Okay, that right now, when I walk into a fitness professional or a sport professional, and I ask that question: should I sauna? Should I red light? Should I do zone two? The answer is probably coming from a position of dogmatism, of dogmatics. Okay, this is my
Yeah.
program. This is what I do, and I'm sure I've said this on your podcast before. Eric, you and I are both male, human, Homo sapiens. We have a lot of very similar DNA. Okay, but the DNA that we share is ancient, meaning that you only have evolution with an extinction event. Okay. So without an extinction event, there's nothing that clears out part of the DNA so the other part can thrive. All there is diversity. And so humans haven't gone through an extinction event in millennia. So we're looking at a situation where we've had an incredible level of diversity. Okay, it's realistic that you could be a vegetarian and I could be a carnivore. It's realistic that I thrive on zone 2 and you thrive on zone 5. It's realistic. These things can all come into play. Um, the challenge is being able to answer that question. Again, if you come to me and you say, should I sauna? I'm going to do a needs assessment. I'm going to figure out where that fits into your program. Yeah, we're pretty sure sauna works good for everybody. The question is, do we have time to integrate it? How do you do it? And should you do it at my facility, or should you go back to Wayfair and order a sauna and put it in your house so you can do homework? Um, should I do zone 2? Well, you may not have time to do zone 2 at the work, so you need to go back and order a bike that you put at home and use your heart rate monitor. But that facility has the ability to aggregate that data too, so that they are the oracle that person turns to from advice. And I think we need to get to the point to where the professional is using data to make that decision and answer those questions, rather than just dogma. And I'll go one more step on this, is that I was in Boulder 2 weeks ago at an event there, and if I got asked once, I got asked a dozen times about HRV questions. And if you've listened before, you'll know HRV is kind of my jam. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're waking up in the morning and you're looking at your data and you're making the decision of how you train that day, you're on a path to failure. Okay. If that is, we know that doesn't work. Okay. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get confused. But I always like to talk about, for any level, you've got to have a purpose. You've got to have a goal. You got to have something you're working towards. If you're an athlete, that's easy. There's usually an event date that you can circle on the calendar and you work towards. If you're that athlete's parent, you're then starting to things change. So rather than necessarily changing for a physical challenge, you may be training for your next vacation. Okay, we're going to go to the beach. I want to enjoy it. I want to walk the beach. I want to do this. I call these trainable life events. Okay, these are the things that you hang pictures on the wall about. No one takes a picture of their scale and hangs it on the wall. Okay, they just don't do that. So
Yeah.
so using weight as a goal is the worst goal in the world, because no one puts that picture on the wall. But people put pictures of finishing the 5K with their arms in the air, or they put pictures standing at the beach with their family. And so you get that purpose-driven event out there, put a program together to achieve that goal in a manner that you define, and then work towards it, and then use your indicators as secondary indicators. Is my HRV generally trending up? Is my HR generally trending down? My nighttime resting? Are these, if they're not, let's go back and revisit this. I had a call probably 3 weeks ago or a month ago. I was looking over a guy's data. I'm thinking he's 55, 56, and he's doing good work. He's got tons of data. And I said, when's the last time you got your hormones checked? He's like, he said, I was afraid you were going to say that. And I said, why would you be afraid of that? He said, well, I'm trying to do this naturally. And I go, wait a minute. If your testosterone's low, your testosterone's low. Replacing it is natural. That is a natural thing to do. And he went and got his testosterone checked, and it was just dog low. Okay, so he started TRT, and I'll talk to him in a month ago, and I'm sure we'll see his data take off because his physiology is correct. But we couldn't get to that point until we had the data to make the evaluation of, I wonder what element is missing here. So that's I think those are elements of what we start to see in 2035.
When you look at, you talk about looking over someone's data, when you kind of balance ease and accessibility of data and the best data you can get. So like, what's the most practical data sets that you can get on most people, right? I mean, I think elite athletes, they're going to be more willing or more apt to get better data. But for the general population, like, what do you think is the highest quality data? If I'm a coach or trainer or practitioner or gym owner, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to start incorporating more data. I want to at least start to learn, get in the practice of having it. Like, what do you recommend to them? What's the best?
Any data. Any data is better than no data. Okay. This is the first thing. Okay. It's the commitment to the process. Okay. And for instance, with my wrestling team back in 15 through 18, we started. I did not have a ton of electronic wearables when we started. I had one device that I was moving from athlete to athlete to measure HRV. I didn't have heart rate monitors on these guys yet. But all I did was start to collect weight room data. And the way we collected is I had a manager come in. We identified what I thought were the focus exercises. What were the big ones that I really wanted to. I didn't record bicep curls and tricep push downs and things like that. We recorded the big, squat, deadlift, bench press, things like that, hang clean. And we only recorded their best set. So they did their routine. We collected their best set, what the weight, what's the reps. And I did not have an athlete management system at the time. So I actually went to the big data group at Ohio State, and I talked to a guy there, and I got an intern to come work with me. And this intern used it as a school project. So it was a really cool applied project for him. And we created a Google form that I had a manager walk around to each of my athletes and say, what was your best? And it was usually 1 or 2 exercises per day. We weren't recording 20 a day. They might have been writing 20 down on their workout card, but we were only recording 1 or 2 into our system. This went into Google Forms, which into Google Sheets that we would write, and we would put a little algorithm in there, and then we could turn around and pull it out the backside. But after about a year, we got to the point where we could start to make some decisions. We could view some things. Now, here's the other thing that we did, Eric, that was someone else's idea. They came to me and they said, do you have a way where we can evaluate success of, I think I had 38 guys on that team. 9 or 12, I forget now, were All-American or better. So my worst guy in that group was 6th in the country. My best guy was an Olympic gold medalist, had an Olympic silver medalist, had multiple national champions, but they were All-American or better. My second group that we came up with was guys that had started for us but never made All-American. And our language to that team was, if you start for us, we expect you to be able to be an All-American. That was the expectation. And then the third group was guys who never started. Now, these people all trained together. They all ate together. They all, the technique was all, it was all the same. But so what were the factors that determined success of those 3 groups? Well, in the absence of all of that weight room data, I had the head coach come to me and say, I want to do a bench press club. And I said, over my dead body, we are not doing that. And he was blown away, because that was dogma. That's what everybody does. And so in my data, I found that bench press, success in the bench press predicted nothing. And in fact, it probably had a negative impact on performance. If the expectation is all American, someone who spends too much time bench pressing probably can't get there. So we're not putting that on a wall. We put things on the wall that we demonstrate make a difference. So let's translate this to the wrestler's parent or grandparents. What are the KPIs that they use? Well, this is where HRV comes into play. HRV can be a wonderful variable for me with the athlete. Are they ready? Are they resilient? Readiness and resilient applies to their parents as well. And oh, by the way, it also applies to their grandparents. Now, I'm probably not manipulating weight room stuff with the grandparent. I'm like, get in and lift. I don't give a shit what you do. Just get in and lift, number one. But let's pay attention to your sleep, your nutrients, your light, things like that. We're probably shifting this just a little bit. But in the absence of data, I can't get there. And to answer your question, any data.
Yeah, good answer. I think a lot of people are still very intimidated, maybe at the coaching level within gyms. I think in the performance arena, it's more apt to use data, but people are still confused about HRV. Not quite sure what to do about it. The data from an Aura to a Garmin to a Whoop to whatever to an Apple, it's not unified. It's not codified in any way. So I guess at a practical level, when you're saying like gathering data, it gets a little complicated, especially in the resting heart rate in HRV, because there's just so many devices, right? And I know there's a lot of companies like Rook, who is now, pulling in all the data, they're making it usable, they're cleaning it up, making a way that's very usable for someone to have one particular data source from multiple inputs. So that's cool. That's exciting. But like, yeah, what do you recommend to people at that level? It's like, it can get complicated at this point.
It absolutely can. And so my recommendation is that you develop advisors. Okay. There are people like me out there that, I had the benefit of, when I was at OSU, I had multiple devices. I worked with, I had 4 different companies. I had devices from 4 different companies. So I saw it. And I had the benefit of working with the Air Force Research Lab that at the same time was running competency on a lot of this data. So there are devices that you just measured that, frankly, I don't look at their data. I have a good friend, Joel Jameson, who's kind of an OG guy in this HRV space, and I was having lunch with Joel a couple years ago up in the Pacific Northwest, and he said to me, he says, we can predict HRV statistically accurate with 3 nights of sleep data. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Makes sense. I don't have but the question is, can I use that as a tool for coaching? Is that a good enough tool? So number one, if you're a professional and you want help with this, go get help. There are people out there, and there are people like me. Just reach out. You go to trade shows, you go to biohacking shows. I'll tell you one of the funny things. So this biohacking space is a space that you and I are both kind of familiar with. Not everybody is, but I describe biohacking as people who want the benefit of exercise but don't want to exercise, and so that's what you see a lot of there. But there's some interesting technologies. And when I go to one of these shows, I visit everybody and I ask a couple questions. So is this technology vetted? Do you have some fundamental understanding of research methods? So you know what? If you're a professional in this space, you probably should have a degree. If you don't, you should be looking at, okay, what are my chops as it relates to physiology and statistics? You don't have to be, listen, if you are competent enough to go put $100 bill on a roulette table, and walk away with more than $100, you have enough statistical understanding to understand the statistics of what we're talking about. So this comes into play. And if you don't, you know what? Coursera. You can go onto Coursera and take a free course in introductory statistics and really move the needle. But it's not going to come to you through osmosis. Okay, you can't sleep on the book and think that it's going to migrate across your cranium. You've got to go through an active process of doing that. And I guess what I'm saying here today is that if this isn't part of your portfolio as a professional, well, start to think about adding that.
I love it. And I recently caught up with Joel Jameson too, and you made me think like the Morpheus platform, it's
Mm-hmm.
trainwithmorpheus.com, I believe, if you want to check it out. That's a really good way to aggregate data.
Oh,
Like, they specifically have a solution to aggregate wearable data and make it usable for, training purposes and, more on the conditioning side, but that it's a really good one as well.
yeah.
I want to go ahead.
No, Joel does a great job. Joel's one of the OGs, and
Yeah.
and again, I have no problem recommending him. I sent him a note last night or day before yesterday, saying, "Hey, I want to have you on my podcast." So Joel's a guy I have a huge level of respect for. He does a great job.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you mentioned like the facilities, in the near future, how those will change, what those will look like. I mean, do you have a vision? Like, what do you think facilities will look like in the next 10 years?
I think it varies, whether it's urban, suburban. You know, listen, I live in a 42-foot recreational vehicle. It was important enough for us that before we started on this nomadic adventure that we're on, that I figured out a way to put a sauna in it. I figured out a way, I don't have my Peloton anymore. I have what's called a Velotron, which is an older, high level lab quality bike. My daughter wanted the Peloton, so we gave it to her. That's what parents do. And now my wife loves the Velotron, so it was a great move. So I'm very happy about that. I figured out how to do my strength work when we're on the road. So I created a solution for my wife and I. Now, I was talking to my daughter last night, and she's a coach at the University of Pittsburgh. She has access to all kinds of facilities there. She said, "Dad, I went out and joined a gym last night or day before yesterday or whatever." And I go, "Oh, really?" I said, "That's kind of cool." She says, "Yeah, I went to so-and-so. They have a sauna. They have all the equipment. I'm not fighting the students for it." She has a bit of anonymity there. When she walks into the university-based facility, she's the coach. And, I used to, when I had my facility, I had this practice that when I was training, I wore a hat and the hat said, "Don't bug me." And everybody knew that when I was training, you left me alone. And when I took the hat off, you have full access to me. But when I'm in my space and my time, leave me alone. Maybe that's why I'm doing so well on my nomadic trip, because nobody bothers me. But
Yeah, I get it.
but I think that facility of the future probably is integrative, meaning that you're going to put things in there that member or that member of your tribe can't do at home. I'll tell you, I've become a huge fan of things like hyperbaric, of things like, I use red light. I have a 1 by 3 foot red light panel, but I have huge respect for, the big beds, the big red light near infrared beds. Those things, there's more light. They're better. Now I can't fit that in my rig and I don't have a budget for it. But in a facility, so to answer your question, it's going to be adjunct technology. It's going to be something that I can't put at home. But it's probably also going to be your data center, your knowledge center. When people come to that facility, Eric, I'm a boomer. I was born in 1962. I'm one of the last 2 years of the baby boomer generation. I graduated from college, and it was a big deal when we went from rotary dials to push button dials to wireless, but they were on the phone system. They weren't cell phones. They were just wireless phones. You couldn't be, you had to be within radio distance. I still like this mode of communication. I now am old enough that I've got a lot of professionals that are much younger than I am that are very comfortable texting, Instagram messaging, things like that. And frankly, it's a bit overwhelming for me. I mean, someone's, hey, I sent you a note, and I'm like, where? Was it LinkedIn? Was it Instagram? Was it text? Was it, what was it? And that's challenging to me. But there's still value in a face-to-face conversation. You still gather a great deal of information being in proximity to another human. There's a trust thing that's built there. And I think that that facility provides the opportunity for the tribe to come interact with the pro. And that pro has to get better and better all the time. We were talking earlier about the evolution of these recovery centers. And you know what? 2 years ago, I was trying to understand cold therapy. So I went and joined one, and I went and did cold therapy anywhere from once to 3 times a day. And I had a bunch of physiological markers that I had going. And you know what? I didn't see anything move the needle. Does it mean it didn't do anything? No, I think it probably did do something. But what I learned is that we don't have the prescription done yet. We don't have the ability to assess and prescribe on that. We do have the ability to assess and prescribe on sauna. We do have the ability to assess and prescribe on hyperbarics. We do have the ability to assess and prescribe on some nutritional technologies. So I think this is the opportunity that facility has. If they then begin to aggregate, I had N of 1. I think I had 45 data points on an N of 1. Well, if I have 100 data points on N, and if I have 100 ones and I go to 4,500 or 45,000 data points, I now get to the point to where, okay, I may be able to see something in there. Okay. So this is that facility of the future that you asked me about. It's going to have the ability to aggregate this. I don't know if you've ever read Peter Attia's book, Longevity. I think it's is it Longevity? I'll think about it here in a minute. Outlive, that's it. He has this concept in there of medicine 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And I love this, that 1.0 was Hippocrates. If you eat better and you move and you do this, you live better. Then there is the discovery of the light microscope. We start to learn about biologics. We start to learn about viruses. We develop germ theory. And medicine went ham on that. And that's really where medicine is at today. It's organ based. I have a cardiologist, I have a nephrologist, I have an orthopod, a neurologist. But longevity and certainly some performance is now moving to a cellular level. We're looking at cellular performance. And when we're looking at cellular performance, we're starting to look at a lot more data. We're starting to look, and this N of 1 becomes critical. And this was Peter's Medicine 3.0. How do we use sensors in order to make evaluations? And I like to combine this with one other concept. The former president of the American Psychological Association, whose name is Dr. Martin Seligman. Seligman is famous for starting the field of positive psychology. And in his speech to the American Psychological Association, when he accepted the presidency, he said, psychologists are great at helping people go from -10 to 0. He says, why aren't we helping people go from 0 to 10? And this is where the whole positive psychology thing came from. And this is what I like to think about medicine, fitness, biohacking. Medicine is dealing in that negative space. I have symptoms, I have a negative symptom, something's going on. Performance, we're working up in the positive space. It's the 0 to 10. I think most of us want to be above 0. We know that when we go below 0, we're starting to develop symptoms and we've got problems. But we want to be up in that 0 to 10 space. So the question is now, again, whether it's one of these recovery centers, whether it's our clubs, the club that aggregates the data best is going to get a look at, okay, how do I plug them into 0 to 10? And so I think these are elements of what you're going to see in this facility down the road.
Don, is there anybody out there, whether it be, athlete management platform or, maybe a specific cutting edge gym or performance center, sports performance center that you're looking at, they're like, okay, these guys, they get it. They're doing it well. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're ahead of the curve. Like, is there anybody that we can look at and be like, okay, this is something we should perhaps at least acknowledge and look at and maybe even emulate?
I think the UFC did a really good job a few years ago when they established the UFC Performance Institute. Those guys are doing really good science. And where it's coming from is that, where that all came from is that when you have an athlete training for an event and as they come up to the event, they get hurt and they can't do the event, that's a multi-million-dollar loss for that organization. So it's
Right.
insurance. What can we do to keep these athletes healthy so we can get them to fight day? Well, there's some great data that have come out of that facility. They're doing some wonderful work, and they're doing a nice job of sharing their data too. They're not black boxing this, keep it to themselves. They're communicating at a pretty high level. I think they've done a really good job. As the Olympic Training Center does, but the Olympic Training Center is a little different, and it's more challenging. Um, to answer your question, there's a lot of people taking swings at this. There are some schools that have done a good job, like UConn and Notre Dame. I'm actually doing a podcast with a friend of mine, Skylar Richards, who was a athletic trainer who was working with the Orlando soccer programs. And there's a paper that just came out literally day before yesterday or this week on interdisciplinary sport performance work versus transdisciplinary. And the interdisciplinary is largely people working together, but in their own groups. And so you have your strength and conditioning people, you have your athletic training and medical people, and you have your nutrition and psychologists in like a third group. Interdisciplinary means we're going to work collaboratively, but you're going to stay out of my shit and I'm going to stay out of yours, is essentially what they're saying. But transdisciplinary takes the approach that we're going to get our data into a single place. Okay. We're going to come up with rules for who can access data and how, but the data is shared. Right now in interdisciplinary, the guy in the weight room, the athletic trainer and the doc, and the nutritionist and the psychologist, they all have data, but they're probably not sharing it. So there's insights that are not available. It's evolving. It's changing all the time. There's still a lot of dogmatic limitations that are going into this. Frankly, there's some people that are afraid to be challenged. Wow, they won't cooperate fully because they're afraid to have someone say, yeah, maybe you're not correct. And here's data that backs up. So I've run into this, and the system is big, and a system like that will chew up an individual every time. So you step away and you do things like this, but we're flirting with it. So to answer your question, UFC PI, the work that's going on there is pretty impressive. I know those people. I've been thoroughly impressed with what they've done. The challenge right now is for someone like a UFC PI, if a new technology emerges, what is the threshold that you have to cross to get it in there so they can get it into their process? And that's what's, in this biohacking space, these are the kind of things that are happening. Whether I have a knee that I had surgery on 4 years ago that I got a MRSA infection from, that I was very ill for 60 days. IV antibiotics for 60 days. I was in bed for 45 days and was 6 Percocets a day for September. It sucked. But now I'm doing pretty good, but I still have an angry arthritic knee. I have found 2 technologies that really give me relief. hyperbaric therapy. I was in Las Vegas. I have a friend there. We did 8 hyperbaric dives in 5 days. We went up to Lake Tahoe the next day to go skiing. And I was going skiing regardless. I don't care what my knee felt like. I was skiing. Okay. Well, I do these hyperbaric dives for a week, and we go up to Lake Tahoe, and I looked at my wife. I go, my knee does not hurt today for the first time in 4 years. And I was a good boy. I didn't ski because I saw a pathway to healing. Now, I don't have a hyperbaric. I don't own a hyperbaric chamber. It's not something I can do every day. I have this crazy nomadic lifestyle, so I don't have access to this necessarily. But I've come across another technology, a product called Stem Regen. I started on their protocols June 1st. May 28th, 29th, and 30th, I was eating double dosing high anti-inflammatory pharmaceuticals to try and keep my knees together, probably doing liver damage, but trying to keep my knees under. By the 3rd day of this protocol, my knees, I was off of all my pain meds. By the 5th day of the protocol, I was riding my bike outside for an hour for the first time in 2 years. And by the 7th day of the protocol, I was lifting. So here are 2 technologies, completely in 2 different domains. And I can go back that when my knee's really cranking on me, a sauna session really moves the needle for my knee pain. Well, when we look at hyperbaric, sauna, and this stem cell supplement, they all stimulate stem cell production and circulation. So I'm like, well, dumbass, maybe you should start paying attention to this. So that's, but I'm an N of 1. And as we aggregate these things, so to go back and answer your question, that facility, what's in it, I'm not sure as far as physical assets. Professional assets, there's someone that understands physiology at a high level, and can be the oracle for those members. Because you can't get this advice from an emergency room. You can't get this advice from your family doctor. There are some functional med docs that are doing a good job, but you know what? You're paying a pretty penny to get there. So, this is how this comes together. And it's not dogmatic. I can't emphasize this enough. It's based on science. It's based on data. And we're constantly resisting the urge to say, that's my program.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds a lot like what the premise for Proof 3, what they're launching soon, which is a really interesting one too.
Yep.
Don, as always, you gave us quite a bit to think about today. I have some notes to follow up on personally. So it's been it's another great one. So nowadays, Don, if people want to get a hold of you, they want to reach out to you about advising or whatever it may be, or just ask questions and follow. What's the best place?
LinkedIn's the best way to do it.
Okay.
I used to use Twitter a lot to push information across. I'm just getting ramped up to start that information distribution stuff more. LinkedIn is a good way to find it. My personal website is called trainrecoverwin.com, www.trainrecoverwin.com. You can go there and keep an eye out that we're recording content. My podcast will be called Life Over the Horizon. The URL is overthehorizon.life. So, but those are the 3 best ways to do it.
Awesome. Don, thank you so much for joining me again. I was so glad to see your name pop up in my email inbox. I was like, oh, yes. Yeah, I'll take Don again.
I'll take it. I'll take it every time we have an opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Don Moxley.